Welcome, everybody, to MSP Confidential. I'm coming to you this week from Nashville, Tennessee. We're at the Robin Robbins Boot Camp here, as we have been for many years. And it's one of those big events every year that we come out with the big ScalePad team and spend some great time here with a lot of our existing partners, as well as meeting new folks. And of course, a lot of the other vendors that tend to sponsor conferences like the Boot Camp. Today, I have a wonderful guest, a great partner of ScalePads and a fantastic MSP, and just a great human being all around, Mr. Joe Markert from Transformative in the San Francisco Bay Area. Joe, welcome to the live stream. How are you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me, first of all. Yeah, no, we've been having a busy start to the year and lots of exciting stuff with AI and everything popping up. Got our hands full, that's for sure, but a lot of fun stuff that's fun and creative, and that's it's kind of important for me is finding ways to make work fun.
Well, I think that's an interesting comment simply because I think the industry kind of delivers the fun day in and day out. You know, there's always a moving goalpost kind of situation, whether it's cybersecurity the last 5 years, it's been a moving goalpost, and certainly now AI. And I see a whole spectrum of conversations happening where MSPs are concerned. You know, some of them are not letting customers touch it. Others are like embracing it and trying to get in front of those conversations. And it kind of telegraphs a bit of the relationship that those MSPs are trying to build with those customers. You know, a truly consultative rather, or that kind of business relationship, as opposed to a bit of the delegated IT or the traditional IT that we were used to making.
Right.
What's your take? You know, are you guys in front of those conversations, generally speaking, with the varying trends and so on?
Yeah, I think that's something that we just kind of intrinsically knew since early on. We kind of needed to be not just reacting, right? Kind of the whole conversation from 7 years ago, reactive versus proactive. It was definitely on our minds from the beginning that we needed to show up and be of value no matter what was happening. And so we've always endeavored to kind of, you know, for lack of an overused better overused phrase, thought leaders to our clients, you know,
Yeah.
being their Sherpa, their shepherd, if you will. So that's we're always trying to look at, you know, I think somebody once said it best, you know, we're a big Microsoft shop, and, you know, Microsoft is, you know, about 4 years ahead of us, and we're 2 years ahead of our customers. So we always have to keep that in mind when things like AI land, or, you know, big moves from Microsoft to the cloud or virtual desktop. You know, we need to embrace it. We need to be ready for it. We need to connect the dots, and then we need to kind of recalibrate a little bit. We're excited because we're tech folks. That's what we do. We get excited. But we have to remember our customers may not be ready for that. And so it's really becomes our job to help really be that advocate for them, help them ascertain when is the
Mm.
right time versus just the cool factor. Is it, you know, is this really going to help our business move forward? And what do we need to do? Like you said, with AI, a lot of security thoughts to do it responsibly ahead of rolling that out, right?
And so the topic today was kind of this idea of business transformation of the service, which kind of leads me to this idea that I think MSPs, and I remember having this interesting conversation with Paul Dipple a number of years ago on a webinar that we did, and he was talking about this idea of the next gen MSP, and the next gen MSP was not somebody who was necessarily doing very specific things, but rather sort of this adaptability or the business transformation capability, sort of intrinsically part of their operations, and not necessarily sticking to old ideas or old ways of doing things, but just that idea of embracing change, embracing technology, and then also being able to bring that in front of their customers. And so maybe this wasn't always the case. Perhaps there was a status quo that was being held for a long time. Talk to me a little bit about that, you know, historical
Sure.
getting in front of change in that way.
Yeah, I think for us, you know, we used to be function one, like the help key on your keyboard. That was once upon a time where the the genesis of our business came from. Now no one even knows that that opened a help window for anything in an application. But that was, you know, the us changing from function one to transformative, which we did a couple years ago in the middle of the pandemic, was really about was really about us, more than just a name change, more than just a brand change. It was really embracing where we felt we were headed as a company and where we wanted to be, the kind of work we wanted to be doing. So, beginning from 2000, Friday the 13th of July 2000, when the .com I was working for crashed and I became a consultant overnight. Fast forwarding to the to about 2017, we were doing traditional, IT break fix, and then transitioning into MSP before there was anything MSP. Trying to cobble together tools because they didn't exist. Um, Around 2017 was really kind of a pivotal moment for us. We had been started to do some compliance, some security and compliance work for some customers working for the utility here in our state, and it was a eye opener. We learned a lot about what goes into that, the type of the tools that we would use to meet compliance and to manage a customer environment in that way. And just a year later, we were able to go from using 4 or 5 different platforms or tools to just using, at the time, it was called Microsoft's Enterprise Mobility and Security Platform. And we passed muster with Bank of America for a client who was trying to win them as a customer. There's no gray area with B of A. You're either compliant or you're not.
Mm.
And we were able to take them from negative 60 to 60 miles an hour in under 3 weeks, and we passed with flying colors on our first try. And that was kind of a pivotal moment for us. We had already been somewhat Microsoft fans. The Surface hardware was really starting to come into its own. Satya Nadella, quite famously, was addressing some of the mistakes they'd made in their cloud strategy. And then here we are with security at the core and underpinning all of that. And we made a conscious decision in that time frame to go all in on Microsoft. And I want to clarify what that meant is we weren't saying we weren't going to help clients that were on Google, because that client that was trying to get B of A was on Google, but we were going to secure them with Microsoft. We were going to make that our core play, and so that pivot for us was the beginning of this transition into becoming transformative. And I say that because it was really not just the doubling down on Microsoft as a platform, but really we started to dig in and look at Microsoft's best practice roadmap for business transformation. And that was really when a lot of light bulbs went off for us. Like,
Mm.
Microsoft has just laid it out for us how we can really take a client and accelerate their transformation, really ensure, keep it simple, that they're getting all of their money's worth out of the licensing that they're paying for. And that began that transition for us of really, how do we get ahead of helping the business look at IT as a profit center versus a cost center?
Mm.
And that's probably a good pause point. We could go in a lot of directions from there, but that was really where we realized we need to start really helping illuminate how they can more appropriately leverage their technology versus just always looking at us as those people they call when it's broke and another bill I have to pay, right?
Well, and let me double click on that because I don't think or have ever experienced an overnight acceptance or from the part of the client on this new way or this new light bulb that went off. Or we're going to start doing things this way, and so there's often an evolution to that transition for the client themselves. And I'm curious what kind of barriers or resistance or challenges you have encountered sort of as you changed a bit of your go-to-market strategy there on getting
Sure.
clients to either come along or maybe, one of those situations where they just don't see it and you got to part ways or what have you. But tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It was not an overnight success per se. I mean, we do have clients who've been with us 15 years plus, so we have a lot of trust from those clients. They really lean into us and include us in their decision making. It's newer clients, I would say, that tend to be a little bit harder, and those that we might be dragging them along, quite frankly, in terms of their operational maturity level. They may not be thinking at the level we are, and that takes a little bit of more effort, but even before we got where we are now, we can talk a little bit about how we're engaged trying. This is a kind of a new pivot for us in the last year and some change of how we're trying to better integrate into our customers' business processes. But really, that starting process, we had this aha moment, but to your point, was everybody ready to come along with us? Certainly not everybody. And even those that we had a lot of trust with and great rapport with, you know, they suddenly, we're really kind of trying to lean into Microsoft, and people are cynical, understanding they're questioning that maybe they've got Slack, maybe they've got Asana, maybe they've got Zoom. They have other tools that are solving these problems. I would tell you that, and I'm sure a lot of us out there could echo this. Like, uh, March of 2020 changed all that.
Mm.
Because a lot of the resistance to change, because we were really leading with the collaboration. Let's really improve how we collaborate, communicate, and operate as an organization more effectively. That was kind of the initial conversations that we were having with security at the core of that. And suddenly, all the tools that people thought were really helping them to get their job done well weren't necessarily getting the job done well. And I absolutely had customers, not a made up story at all, that went from 2 months prior going, we don't need Teams, we're fine, we got this. Half the company's using Teams, half's using Slack. That's great. To, hey, so about that Teams thing, what would it look like for us to consolidate and to simplify? And of course, that mindset carried through to where we are today. One can argue, are we all the way on the other side of it without going into that rabbit hole? It has certainly changed people's mindsets. And I think somebody had said it to me, what they had noticed is that did accelerate the transformational process of thinking for a lot of clients. And for those that did get it, now they're asking what's next. They don't want to go back. Now they're really thinking, okay, now I've got it. They had that aha moment somewhat by necessity. And now they're like, okay, well, how do we do more? What's next? What's the next thing we do? And those are the clients, they're not all going to lean into where we want to go, but those are the clients that we see truly as our transformative customers.
Mm. Do you feel like that same, I guess, openness or open-mindedness to that change or that transformation is affecting all the other conversations potentially happening across the board? Because security obviously is one, but I see a lot of discussion with the compliance stuff in the next little while. And you mentioned that customer that had the B of A thing, but not every MSP is dealing with clients that have compliance or regulation challenges. But certainly it's kind of telegraphing a bit of the necessary evolution that's needed with the way that we relate and work with clients on this IT thing or technology thing, because it feels like the old school was a bit of that delegated productivity IT, very, very specific, and now this kind of it requires the client to participate of their own rescue, which is something that Rob Bull says all the time from Blockworks, and I love that expression because they hadn't been used to really participating actively in any of those conversations, and even there might be a desire to do that, but sometimes they still don't have the systems or processes or people or structure in their organizations to actually, carry a conversation forward. The desire often is not enough. But so curious what kind of things you work with clients to help them actually structure their businesses in a way that they can adopt some of these things for long-term scalability, growth, and so on.
That's a great that's a great question, and I would say even for us, it's constantly evolving. I think I actually even sat down with Dan quite famously on a previous webinar, and we talked about our cadence of engagement a couple of years ago, and it's a trial and error, constant iterative improvement sort of thing, and then certain clients have certain ways that they are comfortable to engage. But I think we really started. The first pass was like, let's just make sure that we're engaging more frequently. Let's make sure we're staying in more consistent communication with the client. That was fundamentally where, ahead of even the brand change, like we just let's do the basics. Let's make sure we're not just waiting for things to break. Let's really be more proactive, even in just that proactive engagement. Let's make sure we're meeting, we're having the QBRs, all of that stuff, right? And we refined it, and we found that different meetings with different constituents made sense, because we found that there was resistance from leadership or ownership to attend every IT meeting because it wasn't seen to be of value, or it was that classic, well, this is just Joe showing up with a shopping list of things he wants me to spend money on. I think the thing most recently that I've found a bit of traction with is really, instead of inviting the customers to come to us, Certainly, we have that cadence at the operational level with the IT points of contact and people between our team and the
Mhm.
customer. But I mean more at the leadership level, at the ownership level, where we're thinking more strategically. Instead of inviting them to come to me, and it's my show and I'm hosting them and I'm going to talk at them, which is kind of the implicit, implied. That's what it's going to be. Joe's here to present us some things. I kept, even early on, I was asking the clients, I want you to present to us in this context, but they rarely come prepared to do that. So, what I've started to do with a handful of our clients is invite me to your EOS meeting, to your board meeting, to your leadership team meeting. You don't have a CIO, CTO in your org. That's a big part of the value you're paying for is access to us as a consultative body. Bring us into that conversation. Let us, because there's often assumptions made that we don't need to go to transformative for this because that's not IT, but we all know IT is moving far out of operations and it's into sales and marketing and customer, acquisition and retention. And so there's always surprising things that happen when I get to sit in the room and listen in and hear what they're dealing with. And sometimes it's even just the Rolodex, right? Opening the Rolodex
Mhm.
or having seen how another company solved a problem from a different vertical, but that's relatable to them. And so far, early in the last, I say by early in the last year, that kind of engagement, not every customer, it takes a minute to convince them that they want to let you into the castle. But those that do are finding it to be of value.
Well, and the devil is always in the details because it takes a minute to convince them to invite you into the castle. Could mean a lot of different things, of course.
Yeah.
Not the least of which is, surprise and delight or surprise and resistance, of course.
Mhm.
And I think this is where, a traditional IT business owner that is maybe an accidental business owner and has been focused mostly on technical things might really struggle with even what their role would be inside of that type of context of a boardroom, of an annual planning meeting, and this kind of stuff. Because the reality is, so many MSPs are smaller and have not been doing these things of their own
Right.
volition, anyways, even for their own business. Um, so, did you pick up any particular techniques, things that would help you justify the value of being present in things like board meetings or big planning meetings that maybe you kind of discovered through that trial and error?
Well, I had the unique opportunity that the company that crashed on Friday 13th of 2000 was a company that was building a software platform for companies like Cadence, Cisco, Pepsi Cola. We were coming in quite famously at Cisco at the time. It would take almost 18 to 24 months to onboard somebody into the company culture at the upper management level. And so this whole concept was to take the idea of memes, encapsulate it into a software platform to keep it simple, to increase retention from these management training classes and to continually reinforce that learning every day through the software platform. But more importantly was the gentleman behind this concept was Michael Doyle, who was a very famous change management consultant. He had worked with governments. He had worked with the companies I named, as well as HP and Compact, being one of a few people trying to shepherd them through that merger process. He was an architect by trade and had worked with a group on the BART transit system in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I had this kind of talk about accidental opportunity of being the IT director in this company. And when it crashed, he took me with him across town, and they may or may not have stood up the company under a different name, which shouldn't have happened legally, but they did, and that was my first client. So I got to sit side by side and watch Michael engage with clients in talking about change management. That was what it was all about. So I watched the techniques, some of it very psychological, some of it process, how he mapped out the processes. And so certainly it doesn't replace an education. Not here to say that I suddenly became an MBA overnight, but that really, from early on, that's how I took that to heart and how I engaged with my clients and understanding very early on, 20 plus years ago, that I can't affect change from from the outside in. I can be a change agent, but it only works if the top
Mm-hmm.
is ready for that change. And so that's something I've been able to carry in. And I think because I have that perspective along with the technical acumen and know-how and a pretty damn good team behind me to back me up, I think it gives me a little bit more credibility at the table, but that has to be earned, right? Like, it's,
Yeah.
even if I can tell them that, it still has to be earned. And I think the best opportunity to do that is to give them examples of how we've helped other clients to, even if they're simple, super tangible ideas. Sometimes that's all someone needs to be able to go, okay, well, let's try this out then. Because it's uncomfortable. I'm still seen, even if we're the best partnership, we're still seen as an outsider a little bit, right? And to
Yeah.
let us in and see the numbers or some uncomfortable things they might be talking about that maybe they don't readily want to share. That's usually the bigger issue, more so than what value can I bring, is, to your point, whether they're ready to take those next steps.
Yeah, and it's often ironic, given the level of access that we tend to have into clients' networks and all their data and all the information, that
Yeah.
there is still that barrier at that sea level that is sort of difficult to cross. But that's incredible, and I think this is one of those aspects that I think MSPs perhaps don't think about enough. And everybody wants to talk about business partnership, being a trusted business advisor, but there's always sort of that last mile that seems to be a difficult hill to climb. So that's cool that you guys are doing that. And you mentioned brand, I think, as well, because I think the positioning or the go-to-market of the company, I think, maybe sets interesting expectations.
Hmm.
Perhaps not for the old clients as much as new prospects, but I noticed on your website things like you don't say you're an IT consulting firm, but rather you're a technology advisory agency, or that you work specifically on business process optimization, um, IT for humans. And so, talk to me a bit about the thinking or the process behind a bit of this shift in the use of words, and how that's affected, how you engage with new prospects, or how their perception initially of your company is.
Sure. Yeah, I think where we start in the sales process, it's quickly getting to the differentiator, right? Like, everybody's going to come in and say these things to you, and for the most part, they're all honestly and sincerely going to be accurate. You know, we all have the tool set now. We can all become the credit card MSP pretty quickly, and a lot of the tools we choose even have great teams behind them that are here to mature us and back us up and make us look good and get on sales calls with us. We all really a fortunate time to to be an MSP. You've got so much support behind you to make yourself look bigger than you are. So we really match quickly early on in the sales call. We get out of the way. We're going to do all that, but you're hiring us because you want to do these things, generally speaking. Or maybe not, you're not ready for it today, but this is where you want to go next. This is what we're here to help you do. And so we start talking or educating, even in some cases, a little bit about what is business transformation or digital transformation. What is that? What does it mean? What is it doing? What are success indicators? And then we talk about our process to that, which is really a three-step process. It's enable, it's modernize, and it's transform. And we're just distilling it down to something bite sized that they can grasp onto in a sales call, right, without putting them to sleep. But enable is really the foundation. We're going to enable your business to be secure, resilient,
Mm-hmm.
to collaborate, to be able to do the things you expect any MSP to help you with. Modernize is the first kind of low hanging fruit step of what can we do to improve the organizational efficiency. And often that's going deeper into the Microsoft stack, but also starts the process of looking at the infrastructure, period. What can we get rid of that might go bump in the night, so we can quiet things for us quite selfishly, improve it for the customer, maybe optimize their spend, and if they haven't gone there, introduce them to the ideas of business intelligence, low code optimization, those sorts of things. We just start that conversation. If we now have the foundation and we are in the process on modernizing the business, then we can talk about transformation and transforming. Now we have a good platform to work from, and as we see with business transformation, a lot of companies fail to get that traction because they don't have the expertise in house or the depth in team, or they don't know where to start. They don't have a roadmap. So that's what we're here to do, is to help develop that roadmap. And some of that really comes about from interviewing those constituents around the business to understand how their day operates, how their workflow works, and starting to connect some dots of where might we go next. And there's some common themes, as you can imagine, even across verticals, in terms of really front to back, how do we own the customer in a company, and how do we all have equitable access to that data to do our jobs, et cetera, so that we just kind of lay out that 3-step process and really lean into, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be a true owner without equity, is a great phrase somebody gave me. We're going to be an owner without equity, or we're leading you in this with this idea. We want to see a return on investment the same way I would. And if that doesn't get them, then they're probably the wrong client anyway. But that usually is how we go about kind of setting the stage for why us versus who else you might be speaking to. And even if the price is a little bit higher, we still get people interested in because of that additional layer of consulting that we're going to bring.
If you'll indulge me, I think there's also the nuance of operationalizing a program like this just from your own vantage point internally at the company. And I think, whether it's the cadence or doing it across a multitude of clients in a recurring manner that is sustainable and can continue to achieve some of the business outcomes that you're working with clients on. And maybe perhaps even this layer of separation between this business transformation conversation and then the rest of IT below that is also an interesting nuance, because I find that, again, small shops, and maybe this is a function of having grown the team a little bit now and having the ability to have people dedicated to these conversations specifically. But I always found it, as a 3-person shop for many, many years, to be very difficult to be in a boardroom conversation and 15 minutes later under a desk fixing some Ethernet connectivity, because I think there's the client's perception of that is, why is this person in my boardroom? Perhaps, and maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But talk to me a bit about maybe that operationalization of getting into this consistent layer of that boardroom level conversation.
Yeah, well, it definitely, it's definitely, as I said, we'll go back to that iterative improvement thing. We're not perfect, but we're certainly consistently, like, we just went through a whole redesign at the start of the year of our client engagement methodology. How are we going to do it? Who owns what? Where? What's the cadence? What are the outcomes, the materials for those meetings? And how do we track all those outcomes? Some of those things we might be talking to ScalePad about. We'll see. But that's something that is constantly trying to find ways to improve. And I think the trouble, as you said, is a small team is maintaining that consistency of engagement. And so that was really what we set out at the start of this year. We weren't doing the best at that the last year. We got taken off task because of other initiatives pulling at us. And we don't, not all of our clients too need, that was something we looked at as, kind of, if you will, scoring the client, looking at, but also the OML of the client, who needs, not everybody needs it every quarter. So we kind of had a baseline of a 6-month business review kind of scenario where we could, bare minimum, we're going to meet with you twice a year, 6-month look back, 6-month ahead, and at least give you that scorecard of where you're at. But I think, what's funny, I leaned back into, as I was putting this plan together and designing it for what is now our modern workplace program, I reached out to a childhood friend of mine who's now like really high up at Optimizely, which is an enterprise level content management platform. And I was like, man, if we hadn't spent all those years playing D&D and creating rule sets for games that didn't exist yet, because there was no James Bond game and there was no Star Wars game. I'm geeking out hard here, but I have to tell you, creating those rule sets, understanding how all those things impact one another, and play testing that, if you will, really gave me a leg up, I felt, in coming to create this program of our modern workplace for our customers, figuring out how it operationalizes, what stakeholders do you need at each step along the roadmap, how do we get from A to B, and what's the connective tissue, and what do we need to be successful? What are the deliverables? And if this doesn't happen, how does it affect that? It was it was it was an amazing process to go through that I think would have been daunting, quite frankly, if I hadn't had that D&D training from long ago. But
Yeah.
yeah, the consistent outcome is harder, smaller. But I think one of the things I will say that if MSPs listening haven't done this yet is really leaning into offshoring. That really allowed us to do more with less, in terms of who we hire, depth in team with the budget we have, and being able to have consistent outcomes. And we offshored starting 8 years ago, and that really has been a big leg up for us in terms of being able to be more consistent, with the team we have.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned EOS, and I wanted to maybe veer off into that space for a minute, because EOS is not necessarily new. It's certainly been around for quite a while, but I definitely have noticed an uptick in the number of MSPs that are talking about EOS and have found a bit of this structure, or the I guess the sanity that it gives their business to have some kind of framework to run some of these things. And again, I for the most part, I'm talking about the experience of smaller shops, because bigger shops have no choice but to figure this out to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But the smaller shops are often very, very distracted by a lot of the things that are going on. So I wanted to ask you about your own experience with EOS, and perhaps if you've gone all in, or maybe used little pieces of it that worked in your current state, and what's been that evolution like?
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think for a smaller team, but I'm pausing just because I'm thinking I'm going to laughing to myself a little bit, because we have this thing we call the daily process, and the daily process is really meant for the service delivery team, at its core. Like, this is how we manage the life cycle of a ticket and ensure that it doesn't fall in the cracks, gets handed off. We set up the next person, for success. And really, one of our VP of Ops has deep military background, holds one of the highest civilian ranks in the Army, Special Forces Reserve, holds top secret clearance. I mean, this guy has lived preparation and planning and operational procedure, right? And so I always remind the team, fortunately, we're not being shot at. But the reason the military drills on these things so hard is because when we get busy, that's when the process saves us. But the mistake I see, and we've been guilty of this, the mistake I see so many smaller teams make is throw the process out the window as soon as things get busy. And well, then you've lit the house on fire, essentially. And so whether we talk about that through the lens of having a daily process that we lean into and adhere on, I might be 2 or 3 days behind on my deliverables, but I know precisely what the next step is, what the next toehold is to climb back to the top of that mountain, because I'm following my process. And I think whether you're using any sort of, quarterly planning, EOS, or some sort of management by objective type system, whatever you're using to, keep your eyes on the prize for the strategic level things, not just the ticket level, but hey, we want to get automation going. Hey, we want to, streamline, zero touch deployment for our customers. We want to improve our customer ticketing portal. Whatever that big takedown is you're trying to hit, you are going to get taken off task as a smaller team unless you can dedicate 2 or 3 people to that, right? You're going to get taken off task. But if it's not on the board and you're not tracking it, then you're clearly going to forget it. It's definitely not going to happen. So I think that was really one of the first things for us, was just getting buy-in from the team to understand that we need to take that same approach that we have for the daily process into our strategic process. And that if we, I had some pushback, quite frankly, early on in that. We're smart. We know what we need to do. We don't need somebody tracking us. And I think some of this comes from a position of fear. Hey, somebody's really going to be tracking me now in a way that I'm not comfortable with. But I think if you can really get them to understand, no, this is actually better for you. We can, incentivize you through performance-based bonuses, or obviously we can do more with less. If I never have to manually install apps on a computer again, wouldn't that be better for my day tomorrow? So there's some wins in here for you, getting them to understand how their role fits into that strategic initiative. I think that's some of this is really, and we can touch back really quick too on just even the customer and their transformation. It all comes down to people at the end of the day, and understanding how do we incentivize or motivate them or help them see why, whether it's the customer, whether it's a sales prospect or your team. help them understand why. And if you're not telling them why, you need to back up. I've had that blind spot several times. I need to back up and help them see why it's not happening.
James Clear, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the writer of or author of Atomic Habits, has this great quote, which is, "People don't rise to the level of their goals; they fall to the level of their processes." And I've always found that interesting, and I think there's so many parallels also with the way that our own clients' maturity level and how they exist in their relationship with us. Because I had this interesting idea in a previous conversation where if the client's maturity level is too far high, from yours as an MSP or vice versa, there's probably going to be you're going to grow farther apart in many situations, just from a ability to transact even. And so tell me a bit about, this process maturity evolution, even in your client side, because I think one of the things that's really obvious to MSPs when we start working with a new customer is whether that customer or business has any process internally or not. And sometimes, until we can get to that layer of the C-level or boardroom conversations, we can't even influence the change or improvement or evolution of those processes. Yet it becomes sort of the reason for the decline of the relationship over time. And I'm not talking about IT specific things necessarily. I'm just simply talking about, they're doing this thing that is really backwards from how we see all our other businesses doing that particular task or thing. And perhaps they don't even let us give them that advice, or they're not ready to hear it. And so tell me a bit about your perspective on the client's own maturity and the evolution along with you in that spectrum.
Yeah, there's, in our space, so we're dealing with sub 300 seat clients, and principally probably more the, probably like a lot of us are the 25 to 30 to 150 seats. It's probably the probably average realm of where our clients land. And so most of those customers, even though, especially the sub 100, they don't really have middle management. You have owners and doers, and they don't really want to spend money on middle management because that's back of house. And these are, a lot of our clients when we started were billable based, service based companies.
Neither do MSPs, by the way, for the
Right,
most
yeah.
part.
This is true. This is true. We're guilty of that. Yeah, I mean, that is probably one of the biggest issues that we run into in maturity more often than not, is that there's just we're trying to, like, the win is we got off the IT call in under 7 minutes. Is that really a win though? Like, okay, great. There was the win, I suppose, is we had less than 7 minutes of problems to talk about, but we could have used the other 23 and a half hour to, look ahead, right? To dig into the data, to do some capacity planning or feature planning. And so I think when you have a lack of middle management, operations people involved, or you've tasked an office manager to be operations, or worse, like in an architecture firm, they got a project manager who's in charge of operations. It just doesn't work. And I think one of the leg ups we have today that I didn't even 5 years ago is we have some great consultants for specific verticals that we can embed to really help them clean up their operations, drive more money to the bottom line. And that really is a big unlock for them to start to understand how their OML is off. And that also helped. Joe didn't tell them. We've known Joe for 15 years. How is he suddenly telling me how to run my architecture firm? Well, here's this guy who was head of AIA in Los Angeles for, over a decade and knows how to run a company like yours. Let him tell you what I was going to tell you. But then, he gets to do that. The flip side of it is, though, even if we have clients that are really mature, that, have deep documents that they've put together. They're spending on a high-end CRM, multiple business units. They've got EOS in place, and you might probably intuit that I have one of these right now that I'm dealing with. And so in that scenario, that in this example, this client considers themselves, in a lot of ways, is pretty mature, like in terms of how they're delivering day to day for their clients. But in this scenario, I actually have the unique opportunity of having been hired, fired, and hired back. And so because grass wasn't greener. And so now I have this 12-year view on the company that is longer than most of their employees.
Mm.
and so I can see what has and hasn't changed. And in this course, I've been started to interview the team. I've identified that some of the base problems that we were talking about, some of it tech debt. We just hadn't moved to the cloud, still dealing with failing servers and stuff in house. Um, why are we on Google and Microsoft for file sharing and communications and all of this? Like, what's behind that decision? And as we started to dig into it, we found the problem was not at all as simple as our points of contact were relaying to us, and that there's a lot more. They're not as organized as they think they are. A lot of people are creating their own processes, creating their own obstacle course to get through the day. Even though we have this SOP document, that doesn't help me
Mm.
get my job done. And so in this case, I pretty well know. I've triaged. I've come up with a diagnosis, but it's going to come down to people, and it come back to that conversation we had about being ready for change. I can be a change agent. I can shine the light. I can show you what needs to happen. But I find often when we have a breakdown like this, there is one or more people that are preventing change from happening. They're more comfortable with status quo. And I'm not going to tell you here that I have the answer for how we solve for all of that. Certainly got to be very careful because it all becomes politics. Then we're not even an MSP anymore, right? Now we're a psychologist. But that, it's some of it is just helping them see see the possible, see what it could be if we, and it's great when I can point, when I have depth in a vertical and I can point, and we have other clients doing this. That helps people feel better. They want to feel like they're doing something that their competitors are
Mm.
doing well. It's a new terrain for me coming into this realm where we do have more mature clients that still have problems, and it starts to become, as I said, more about politics than really process or procedure, and that's kind of new terrain for me, quite honestly. But I'm figuring it out, and I have some good resources to lean into, fortunately, to help
Yeah.
figure that out.
And there's often, even more resistance politically than purely technically, and so
Hmm.
this often can compound over time too, because people tend to. I think overall, is people dig their heels into their ideas, and so it's an interesting thing to navigate. But I wanted to ask you, in the context of all this, maybe in the works type of transformation that you're going into to deliver this business transformation as a service, what is perhaps the one or two top things that you're most fascinated with in terms of your own process and the things that you're trying to implement change with inside of transformative?
That's a great ask. I think, operationalizing period for me, I tripped over this a while back in trying to make the business fun again, which was part of what was behind me rebranding as transformative and really embracing what was more fun, was the more consultative, design, creative side of helping our customers. I realized I'm a product manager. I'm a product developer. I mean, I have a background in other realms in the video game space and the audio space, and wherever I've shown up, I love creating brand, I love creating product, customer experience. And so for me, a lot of what I'm excited about right now is really streamlining all of our processes, doing more with less. Automation is a big piece right now that I'm leaning into, especially as you said, being a smaller team. We should be a smaller, nimble team if we're not doing busy work all the time, right? So the big piece for us, looking at RPA tools or automation platforms right now that can help us to streamline. AI. I know it sounds like a broken record. Everybody's got AI, just like 3 years ago everybody had security, and as a tagline on their tool set. But I can say right now, I've got the bulk of our team, our account management team, is all running with Microsoft Copilot, and even just early blushes for the teams. They're a game changer in terms of just practical wins for getting time back in your day.
Mm.
Um, and being able to show that effectively to our client. It doesn't have to be anything esoteric. It doesn't have to be anything way out of the box. Just quick, easy wins day to day that add up to, as Nick Ross famously said on his T minus 365, you get a great 35-minute video on how I'm getting 5 hours back in my week. If you haven't seen it, it's just an excellent real world practical application. So that I'm excited about. And honestly, we've been working on, coming back to your ask about EOS, we had been working on a approach. Our CRO, our business advisor, had a long stint at Intel, and both in Europe and here in the U.S., and they had done a management by objective approach. Similar concept, that you have your salary, and then the rest of your a core piece of it, and the rest of your salary is really based on meeting these objectives and metrics, and identifying which team members or units are you're dependent on to achieve those goals. It's similar concepts to EOS, but some friends of ours, this gentleman Brett Knowles, famous consultant in the OKR space, from PM Consulting. He actually just did a great video that I tagged over on my LinkedIn, about leveraging Viva Insights, and Microsoft's starting to integrate this OKR process into Viva, and I'm super excited about that, because one of the things that I think is a gap for us as MSPs, we have lots of tools to secure the environment, to give people UCAS, to run tools and scripts and whatnot. But the place, and I think ScalePad actually is doing a great job at this, and that is not a sincere plug, is those tools that we need to manage our operations and to actually provide data and capabilities to have this higher level conversation with our customers. And so I'm really excited about what Microsoft's doing with this component with the OKRs and Viva, because now we all have something to rally around. We have something we can visualize, we can look at together, we can dashboard, we can see data, we can see the relationships and the outcomes. That those types of tools have been missing in our environment, and I think that is a bit of a missing link, a missing puzzle piece for us MSPs that are that next gen MSP, if you will, that are wanting to operate at this level, having those tools for us to be able to engage the customer in a meaningful way. That's something I'm really excited about digging into here in the weeks ahead.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. It's so much detail, and I almost a question that wants to ask itself here is, what are some of the risks that you see to not hitting on that plan? And the answer is almost obvious. Well, it's simply not executing on that. But there's so much nuance to execution too, and I bring this up a lot because I was perhaps more of an idea guy always. I was a creative like you. I identify as a musician first. And sometimes when I come into these conversations, a lot of my aura was always this, big idea, big transformation, but operationalizing and executing is not necessarily my forte, perhaps. And I find that a lot of folks in the MSP space are kind of like that. We love the dopamine hit of the small, quick fixes, but sort of the sustained execution over a 6-month or 1 year period can be really, really tough to do given all the oncoming traffic. So tell me a bit about your own sort of execution style, and what are the things that you maybe have realized that you need to work on, or how are you trying to shift that a little bit? Because these are big projects that are, multi-year time horizons, right? So.
Yeah, well, I mean, the core product of our modern workplace program is really a roadmap in and of itself. That's, a layer, below, if you consider it the foundation to whatever the customer wants to or needs to do on top of that. So I think that was step one, is really where are we in that process? And then there's projects within that project, right? Like where our whole security program is a double-click project within that project. So I think we're really actively working on trying to get even better at that. We're not the best at that. We know what it is we need to do. Again, it comes back to that following the process, so we don't let the balls drop, leave too many hanging in the air and let them fall. But I think for us, it's that's why I'm really keen on leaning into these types of tools. And some of this is getting in front of our customer and showing them what we're going to do visually, as well as showing our team what we're going to do visually and how their role fits into that, and the why that we're doing this. And I think some of it, we're not always going to be perfect. Things are going to slip. This is something we talk about with our customers early on in the realm of service delivery, but really in our engagement in total, is that we're humans here. At some point we're going to fall down. We're going to fail. We just need to have that foundation to have good open dialogue around why and what we're going to do to address it. If we can have that foundation to build from, we're going to be fine. Because if I've had too many clients, as we all have in the past, that want to start with blame before we get to solve, and that just is not a fun place for any of us to be. But I think the pivot in mindset for us to be okay with not always hitting, but still having a plan. Where are we in plan? Really started with just putting a dashboard of our SLA stats and our ticket stats in front of the customer, right? So many of us took us a long time to get there, and some of us may still not be there. And often I hear the reasoning is, well, I don't want the customers to see those numbers. What if they're not great? What if they're not great? So what if they're not great? An amazing thing happens when you show the customer the number. It humanizes you. It gives them visibility they didn't have into what's happening in their environment. It starts a conversation that you can have with them about why those numbers might be the way they are. And it helps the team actually subconsciously or otherwise rally around making sure those numbers aren't bad, right?
Yeah,
And
you don't
so,
want to look bad, right?
yeah. And so I think kind of I think if I'm grokking where you're trying to head with that is like if we think about, okay, now we're stepping up and saying we're going to take a layer and a role in both our own strategic plan, but also for our customers. And by default, because they've signed up for a plan that has a plan with it, we have to be comfortable in getting that in front of the client and showing them where we are in the process in the same way we got comfortable with showing those statistics around their service delivery. It's just we have to be able to do that. We have to be comfortable with it, and we have to be honest. And we're also going to learn like a lot of it is capacity planning and just being honest with the customer. And there are, quite frankly, are not great tools in our space right now to really accurately reflect our true capacity and where we are. There's not great project management tools to really say, hey, we should start the project here because the enterprise has some of those tools, but we don't have those tools. And so it's really the onus on us to just do a real good job of level setting with the client. But I would say, just to kind of bring it home, it's in process for us. We still fall down on it, and I think the first step there was just getting comfortable with it's okay to fall down. Just have good open dialogue with the customer, letting them know why we fell down. Try to keep the ball in their court as much as possible, so that way we can keep sprinting ahead. Hopefully maybe that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I wanted to maybe perhaps just as a matter of comment, because you talked about getting almost permission from the client to fall down, making them part of the process, understanding everybody's human. I think those are things that perhaps our default behavior around it is to appear to be invincible. And so I think a bit of that humanity is so important up front. And obviously with your long-term clients, you mentioned a few clients that have been with you more than 15 years, you're going to get a little bit more leeway, to get back up from the fall. And you've earned that trust and you've earned that opportunity, of course. And with the new ones, I mean, if that expectation is not there from the get-go, but instead you've provided this expectation of invincibility and perfect, box lunch delivery, it's going to be really tough when things do go wrong and when you do fail, because they're just not going to have the patience or the time of day for you to say, oh, well, now is when we need to let them know that we are in fact human and can fail, and would you give us one more chance? It's very different to recover from that perspective than from an early on expectation. So I appreciate how much that must be a super impactful way to start the relationship with clients, for sure.
Yeah, I think it was Facebook quite famously had this modus where it was if you make a mistake, you must tell everyone in your team. And I think getting comfortable with making mistakes is step one. One of my favorite conferences was FailCon in San Francisco. It was held for a number of years. I don't know if it's still running. I haven't looked recently, but in the aughts, it was happening in San Francisco Bay Area, and it was really about these tech companies who quite famously had failed spectacularly or otherwise, and they would come in and they would share how and why they failed. It was very collegiate setting. It was a safe space to say what happened, learn from me, learn from my mistakes, and I think that's something we've tried to really take in with our clients. And just you got to be careful not to say we're gonna. Hey, I don't want to set the expectation we're gonna fall down all the time either, right? I got to balance that out. But I think helping just to understand that we're learning from our mistakes, we're learning from our peers' mistakes. That's why I'm involved in the channel in the way I am. I get to selfishly hear from a lot of my colleagues about what is and isn't working, and we can bring that back to our clients. But I think that getting out in front of it, I had a client ask me the other day, why did XYZ not happen? Was I wrong in that expectation? And I just told him flat out, nope, you were that broke. That's what should have happened is what you expected. You're not crazy. And I'm going to go find out why it was broken. I mean, it's just amazing what happens, especially at the business owner level. You'd be surprised when you're honest and you take off the armor for a second and just tell them, hey, this just happened, this hard thing, this difficult thing I'm dealing with. You'd be surprised how many people will turn around and go, I've been there. I know right where you're at. Thanks for sharing that with me and being honest. Let me know what you find out. It really takes the boiling point down when you humanize issues like that.
I heard a great quote in the last little while, which is, failure is not the opposite of success, but rather on the path to success, the opposite of success is doing nothing. And so I love that mantra. It's kind of becoming an underpinning of everything I'm talking about. But I seem to be picking out a lot of these little, succinct quotes that really deliver a strong message, and was curious what you're reading, if anything, right now that is maybe giving you some of the impetus for the execution on the changes, or giving you the inspiration for how you're building, the business as you push forward on this business transformation journey.
Gosh, it's actually, I've been reading a bunch of books on EOS and from all sides, because we're really, this management by objective concept that our CIO brought in was exactly where we wanted to go, and I spectacularly failed at trying to implement that a year ago. I think it was probably even insensitive in the way I brought it to the team, if I'm honest. But I think Michael really brought it around and showed me how we could implement, along with our VP of Ops, Oscar. And then, we've just, as we look at, I'll say quite simply, one of our clear goals, and has been for probably the last 7 years for me, is we know to get where I want to take transformative, we need to either merge or scale in with someone. And so everybody, as you said, in our space is really leaning to EOS. So that's kind of where we're like, okay, we already have the right concept, but EOS seems to be the lane, and there's all these great tools, as I alluded to earlier, for tracking OKRs and whatnot. So I've been doing some reading both from the employee side and the manager side of how do we prepare for that. But I have to say, as I look ahead to where we want to go through M&A, what kind of maybe eventual exit we might want to have down the road, right? We're thinking about life and its full arc, and as you said, a fellow musician wanting to have more time for that in the years ahead. I've been looking at books like, there's a great one, and I'm terrible with the author names, but there's one called Die with Zero.
Okay.
And it's really, and there's a couple different books like Designing Your Best Life, I think I'm paraphrasing something like that a good friend of mine just went through a major life journey after 20 plus years, sold his company, bought it back, sold it again, and now he's really in the situation where he's pivoting into what's next. I've been doing this for 20 years. What's next for me and my evolution, as a consultant, as a creative, as a business owner. And this book, Die with Zero in particular, it's kind of in the auspices of how do we invest, and what do we do with our money, spending it before we're gone, right? We, instead of letting it go into probate or sit in a trust, or have your kids fight over it, fight over that money with each other. But it's more about living life now and finding ways, like we always talk about. I think it's a good walkout topic possibly, is we always think, I'm working so hard today and it's just for tomorrow. I'm busy right now, and then tomorrow I'm going to take that trip. I'm going to study that thing. I'm going to go learn this thing, or read this item or this book or whatever. And I think a lot of the core takeaway of this book is really like finding that time now, because there is no guarantee of tomorrow, right? It's a simple statement, but we all forget it quite easily when we're in the throes of running the business day to day. And it's easier for some of us to do than others, for sure. But I think that's something that I'm really, really leaning into, is with all of this talk about merge, scale, building, growing, how do I balance that with making sure that I'm still living a meaningful life in the process, and showing up and having good experiences with my family, because it's those experiences that inform and improve what we do here, right?
Yeah, I certainly have started leaning a lot more heavily in the last few years towards the experiential living. I think that's really taking hold. And but man, I can't possibly thank you enough for making the time to have this conversation. Thank you for sharing your journey, your knowledge. Thank you for your partnership with ScalePad, of course. And what a great conversation. I feel like we could have double clicked to some of these topics for a little bit longer, but maybe we'll have to do a part 2 and check in on you a year later and see how that EOS implementation of all this has been going. But
where did I succeed on my roadmap. Yeah.
Yeah. Fail. We'll call it fail confidential. And
There we
maybe
go.
a year
I
from
like
now,
it.
we'll talk about the mistakes we won't don't want anybody else to make. But I kid a little bit. But those things, I think those conversations are super important. And the more we have them, this is kind of the whole impetus for MSP Confidential. In fact, was what are some of the things that people can maybe provide a little bit of a light bulb moment for
Yeah.
somebody tuning in and just like, you know what, I think I had been pondering US, for example, and I think that's going to be the reason or impetus why I go chase it down now. It seems to be working for some other folks. And so it's a bit of getting outside of the box or the echo chamber, if you will. So
I love it.
thank you so much. I
Well,
appreciate
thank
you
you.
took
I
some time out of your
appreciate the
day for this.
platform, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I look forward to catching up with you at some event in the future. And if not, when you come up to Vancouver to visit, certainly you're welcome to come see us at the office, of course.
I think it's likely to happen. We're going to share some space before long.
All right. Maybe it will be the
All right.
music that brings us together, of course.
Oh,
So.
let's talk about that. Yeah, take that one
All right.
offline.
All
All
right,
right.
cool, Joe. Well, thank you again. And to everybody else, thank you for tuning in. We're here every Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find us at mspconfidential.com. Thanks again to Joe Markert for the wonderful conversation. And we'll see you all next week. Ciao.